Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first session of the conference, our Caribbean Brownfields Conference. Get ready for EPA grants. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Shanine Mitchell. I am the Regional Brownfields Coordinator. I've been in the EPA program for the last 20 years. I manage several different types of EPA Brownfield grants. I also review applications as well, so this will be a really entertaining session. I also have with me Allison Devine. And Allison, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Allison Devine. I'm a project officer in the Brownfields section as well. I've been in the Brownfields program since 1997. I also manage various types of grants and review grant applications as well. And I'm the coordinator of the Targeted Brownfield Assessment Program, which we'll discuss in a little bit more detail later on.
Excellent. And then we also have Jean Hammerman. Jean?
Yes, hi, I'm Jean Hammerman. I'm the acting executive director of the Center for Creative Land Recycling, also known as CCLEAR. And we've partnered with EPA Region 2 to bring you virtual Caribbean Week. We wanted to have a dedicated session to talk about EPA grants, so we're glad that you're here with us today and are looking forward to getting and answering any questions you may have. Once the grants are released, EPA cannot speak directly with you, and it would be CCLEAR who could support you in terms of providing technical assistance, reading your grants, editing them, and working with you now to set you up for success.
Excellent. Thank you, Jean. So we have 2 poll questions we'd like to ask the audience. So if we can go to the polls, please. Great.
Looks like there's some technical difficulty. Maybe we'll do the polls after, unless they come up at this moment. There's Shanine. It seems like there may be some difficulty with the poll questions, so maybe we should move to the video and then we can do the poll questions after the video.
Absolutely, Jean. So let's get that video started. Sorry about the technical difficulties.
This webinar is brought to you today by the 3 TAB providers: New Jersey Institute of Technology, Kansas State University, and the Center for Creative Land Recycling. TAB program is funded by the EPA Brownfield program. The program provides brownfield technical assistance at no cost to communities. Our other presenters are Blaise Levin with the Kansas State University TAB, Terry Stripes with the City of Spokane, Washington, Ignacio Dayright with the Center for Creative Land Recycling, and Sean Broom with New Jersey Institute of Technology. In today's webinar, we'll explain how the brownfield grants fit into the overall scheme of things and the niche they fill for many communities. And rules of the game, we'll go over the types of grants available and the particular ones available this year and areas that may be emphasized. And the game plan and playbook will talk about the areas where you'll need to do some upfront planning. So you'll be prepared to tell your story and start developing the information to prepare a successful grant application.
Thanks, Debbie, and welcome everyone to Get Your Game On. Okay, the game we're talking about is Redeveloping Brownfields as part of community and economic revitalization, using grant funding that's, of course, we're talking about applying for today to address the environmental concerns holding up the reuse of these sites. Okay, so I'm going to just, as an overview, kind of make a few comparisons between sports and community revitalization. So it takes playing by the rules, it takes a good game plan, a good playbook, a team effort among good players, and previous wins or a track record at least that you're likely to win, and then some intangibles. So with respect to the rules of the game, Mark grants, the rules are the application guidelines. You need to follow those guidelines to score points, right? There's several major sections of proposals or of applications, and they're listed here for a previous competition. You know, these applications are very competitive. Some of the rules are more along the lines of pass, fail, or go, no go. Things like, are you an eligible applicant? Is the site or sites you're thinking about working with, are they eligible for this kind of money? Are you including community engagement and just some other go or no go things? So it's important to know those too, or you could be thrown out of the game. Okay. As far as the game plan goes, that basically translates to having a good project or a group of projects that is based, that's going to address community needs by redeveloping those sites. There's a fair amount of homework, like preparing for any game that you do, to make sure you're showing reviewers that, yes, this is indeed a good project, and then relating it all in a compelling story. And the playbook side of this is kind of all the details of the project, of the redevelopment plan, of the redevelopment project that consists of kind of the three major steps of brownfields redevelopment as some of us look at it. You know, the planning part, addressing the environmental risks part, and then implementing the redevelopment plan part. So it involves building a team. So as you read through this slide and think about where you sit in the local government or nonprofit organization, if you're with one of those, you'll quickly see that you might be the person that actually would lead a grant application effort. You might be the one that helps broker the use of those funds to eligible projects in your community, you know, to help property buyers buy and sellers sell their properties because the environmental issues are being addressed with that grant money. And you'll see that there's other important things that you as a local government or nonprofit can do then to incentivize and promote redevelopment of this site. And so it's really important to work together as a team and to show that in your proposal, kind of like in a team time trial event in a biking race. Basically, each team member, you know, pulls his own weight. They alternate being at the front, the rest and recover in the back, and they all just need to work together. No one's more important than the other, but it needs to be a cohesive team. And you know, if you're not a cohesive team, what can happen is if a team member is unclear of something, like this rider coming back from the front, he's totally out of gas. He's confused whether he should join because there's a rider behind him that's also fallen back. And sure enough, he can't keep up now because there's no, you know, it's too much wind resistance, and this other person behind him that he thought he'd go back and get, he's behind too. Bottom line is at least one of those two need to finish with the team, or they're disqualified, or their team time is really based on the last two guys. So another thing that I think all of us know on this call probably is it's not just about chasing funding. It's tempting, of course, to say hundreds of thousands of dollars. Sure, let's just go after it. And that's almost the total focus, like little kids playing soccer who don't know how to play positions yet. So like in an experienced soccer team where everybody's playing their position, they're passing the ball, they pass it up towards the goal, and you'll notice then it gets kicked to the middle where there's a guy that can take a shot. There's backups to that person. They eventually score. So they've used the money, which represents the ball, but they've scored a goal with it. In writing these applications, it's also about, you know, from the reviewer's perspective, how likely are you to succeed? Do you have a track record? It's kind of like tournament brackets where teams are seeded and based on their experience and capacity. And so any upfront progress you can show that you've already made throughout the proposal, but particularly in the programmatic capability and past performance section, the better you'll score. Also, you know, talking about tournament committees and bowl officials and all that, it's also important to know what they are looking for. Kind of like it's important to know what EPA reviewers are looking for and what EPA as an agency and, you know, to meet their mission, what they're looking for. So obviously statistics they're looking for are how many sites and acres have you assessed and cleaned up and got redeveloped, how much money, other money from other sources is being combined with the money you're asking them for to make your project go. How well are you addressing this year's policy priorities? How are you addressing quote unquote other factors, which is actually a table in the grant guidelines that you fill out to make sure that smaller communities or tribal communities or communities that have been impacted by natural disasters, let's say in a previous competition, aren't getting overlooked. You know, EPA wants to be very fair and spread these funds very widely to very many different types of communities so that it's not, you know, a hardwired effort. Okay, so then there's the intangibles, right? You know, the purpose, the passion behind it. And, you know, many times, again, as sports fans or, you know, elite special operations teams and all this stuff, you know, very high performing groups, you know, the why many times boils down to, you know, personal relationships among the team, like a catcher and a pitcher. You know, how do there's usually just a connection between that kind of a team that, you know, they know what the other is going to do and they're very effective on one level. And then there's kind of the win-win at the community level, like what community needs are being met. And how compelling are they, and how well can you convey this? Like on the right on this slide, showing, you know, elderly care center gives an opportunity for elderly folks to interact with younger generations. You know, to some communities, maybe that's missing, and it's just very important. It certainly is in many communities. That's a good example. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ignacio.
Thank you. And Blaze did go through quite a few rules of the game, and I'm just going to add a few more slides and thoughts here to round it off and introduce and set up our next speakers. Many of you have been doing brownfields, and I see that from the attendee list. Brownfields have been, the program itself has been around since 2002, and over time, the funding levels are what's on your screen now. It's been trending down slightly, but really that's pretty much a function of what's happening in Washington, D.C., really. So last year, of course, there was a lot of other activities going on. And of course, we still have COVID. And the announced funding was about $53 million. We don't really know where that's going to end up. And we're going to hear soon, within a month or less, we'll find out the results. Blaze had mentioned MARC. So MARC stands for Multipurpose Assessment, Revolving Loan Fund, and Cleanup. And this year, there is no multipurpose. At least that's how it has been the last few years. These rules change from time to time, and it is responsive. It's very much responsive to what the EPA hears from you all. So, but we don't expect this to change. And I'll just go through these very briefly. So for the assessment, you see that disc over there, that chart, that disc there, and the top three colors there. EPA really likes most assessment grants to cover phase 1s, phase 2s, and other site-based activities that are related to environmental site assessments. Now, there are other eligible activities such as program management expenses and the gray area there, which is everything else, including activities to initiate brownfields revitalization, and which is more broad area-wide type planning activities, and more specific activities that are more related to a site, which are the reuse vision, revitalization plan, and roadmap. And this is where coalitions can apply together for a wider area. Now, cleanup is more straightforward. It's basically cleaning up a site and the programmatic expenses. It can include health monitoring and monitoring enforcement and institutional controls, and a bit for environmental insurance. And again, I won't go into the specifics here, but that's up to this point what's been eligible under cleanup grants. Now, revolving loan funds pretty much cover what the cleanup grant does, but the purpose of this, though, is for an eligible entity to manage a revolving loan fund to issue loans and sub-grants to other eligible entities to clean up their sites. So in this case, and Blaise pointed this out, is the closer you are to actually building something, the more and identifying projects that are closer to being built, the more competitive you are for these types of grants. Blaise said I might have a crystal ball. Well, my crystal ball is pretty much as cloudy as yours. We've been witnessing what's happened since the start of the President Biden's administration, and so and even from last year, there was and early this year there was a COVID relief bill, which 200 million was earmarked for the EPA. Now we actually don't know how EPA is spending that money, but the money is there. So we will probably hear very soon, or see very soon, the results of where that money is going. If we recall from the start of the Obama administration, there was what was called the ARA, the Recovery Act, and those funds came very quick, and the money was geared toward shovel-ready projects. So we might see a repeat of that, but again, there's no guessing. I mean, there's no telling what will happen. And then, of course, we've heard all this chatter, read all this chatter about what's happening now and all the negotiating going on between in Washington, D.C. And we hear priorities such as infrastructure, clean energy, housing, jobs and manufacturing, even broadband. And so again, a bit more about what's going to be emphasized this year. Now, we all know that community plans, environmental justice, climate change, and infrastructure have been focused for the last few years. Now there's been a broadening of the objectives that EPA likes to cover, and we might see something based on education, health, affordable housing, of course, and homelessness, because that has been in the limelight, especially in your own local situations, particularly in California, affordable housing and homelessness, but in other urban areas as well. And then restoring communities. We've seen a lot of communities which have been over decades been torn apart by different stressors. And we've been hearing a lot about this also. So we don't know where this might be, but we've been hearing a lot of these initiatives from Washington, D.C. This year. And of course, resilience, that's always been at the forefront. Flooding, fire, and sea level rise. This went away, the emphasis of that went away slightly the last 4 years, but we expect that to come up again. So, if you touch on all of these things in your grant application, you're probably going to, as we say, and I've seen that slide, checkmate or turn that pawn into a queen. And I'm going to hand it off to one of our favorite grantees, Terry Stripes.
So I'm Terry Stripes. I'm with the City of Spokane, and I want to talk to you a little bit as a municipality and implementing these projects and getting the grant funds to help you. So I'm going to touch on some of the rules. I'm going to touch on knowing who your referees are and how they can assist you with not only your Brownfields projects, but also some of your other projects. So I'm located in Region 10. I'm in Spokane, Washington, which is not the wet side of the state. It is the home of the Zags. So you're going to hear me talk a little bit about the Zags as we go forward. Now, in this picture here on the slide, you see that nice arch down there in the left-hand corner of the slide. That nice lit up arch is our pedestrian bridge that was built in our university district. That began, and Ignacio mentioned it, as ERA fund dollars. Way back when, under the last economic collapse that we had a shovel-ready project. We had done a study that told us that we needed to put a pedestrian bridge in the university district that would connect our medical district and our university district together. And so one of our first things that we did is we applied to our Department of Ecology for what is called an integrated planning grant, because we had an idea as a community that we needed this bridge, but we didn't know exactly where we were going to put it in the university district. And if any of you have ever worked with the railroads, you know how impossible it is to get something approved by them. So what we had to do through our integrated planning grant was essentially couple that with some public works dollars to do a master plan for a type, size, and location for where this Ped Bridge would span Martin Luther King Jr. Way as well as the railroad and connect the two areas of the university district. So that was one of our first successes. But I didn't know how to pursue a integrated planning grant. I didn't know much about brownfields at all. So one of the things I first did was create a relationship with our referees, and that is our regulators at our Department of Ecology. And you'll find that those regulators aren't just here with a hammer to come down on you when you do something wrong. They are here to help you build what you want to move forward, and they provide a tremendous amount of expertise. So please always tap into them. Don't be afraid of them. They are here to help you. Along that line, your regional EPA headquarters are also great. And if you have just a crazy idea and you're not certain how you want to move forward, tap into your tabs. You've got 3 of them online right now. Tap into those folks for expertise on helping you move forward an idea. They'll help you understand that you can draw upon some of your past community plans to help you formulate your grant applications. They'll help you understand how you can utilize your partners out in the community. So to begin with, I'm one person at the City of Spokane, and I've created the city's Brownfields program, and I've implemented it, and we've been very successful since 2014. Now, the first time we didn't hit it out of the park. I mean, we kind of bombed. Our first EPA grant, we had gone after an area-wide planning grant, and Blaze talked about how close you needed to be on those points. Well, we fell far short. Again, this is another reason why you should stay in touch with your referees, because we had a post-grant application meeting with our EPA folks, and they helped us understand exactly how we missed on our grant application. So the next time we went around, we were all prepared. We worked with our tab providers, we had our partners in play, we had a group of community stakeholders already involved, and so they were able to be our champions out in the community. They were our cheerleaders. So make certain you bring those people together and start working on your plan really early. If you're not in a municipality, you may not know that your municipality has a community plan. We have a comprehensive community plan, and it identifies areas where we are supposed to focus as a city for revitalization. And that becomes a foundation for your grant application. It'll call out, okay, this is an area of blight. We want to change that. And how are you going to change it? And brownfields could become one of your tools for that. And then make certain you build upon small wins. Maybe you haven't applied for an area-wide plan or a community-wide assessment grant or even a cleanup grant. But have you thought about working with your Region 10 or your regional referees about doing targeted brownfields assistance? You can go in and do phase 1 and phase 2 work there and get that done. Again, you could work with your local equivalent of ecology and maybe do a smaller project. And then you have some of that experience Blaze was talking about for scoring those small wins so that you get that experience and you're able to jump off and do a bigger grant application. One of the things I'm going to ask you to keep your fingers crossed for is Spokane has applied for a multi-purpose grant, and hopefully we will learn in the near future that we've got it. And now I'm going to hand it off to Sean to move forward in helping us learn about the playbook.
As Debbie mentioned earlier in the webinar, my name is Sean Vroom, and I'm with the NJIT TAB program. And I'm going to be covering what we're referring to in today's webinar as the game plan elements of the EPA MARC grant application. And those elements include community need data, prioritizing or selecting your sites, and projected results and outcomes. What I'm going to focus on today are those tasks that you can and should begin as soon as possible if applying for an EPA Brownfields grant. And those early tasks are what I'm going to concentrate on. So as you embark on preparing your Brownfields grant application, it's critical to remember that each of the application sections supports and builds on the other. And many of the sections require information, data, and activities that you can't be compiled or conducted last minute, as they can take a little bit of time, and it's critical that the applicant know what those tasks are so they can begin them as soon as possible. So the first element I'm going to discuss is community need data. So, why is community need data so critical to writing a competitive application? Well, first, it quantifies the community needs and challenges. So a strong application doesn't just make statements without the data to support those claims, including data such as poverty rates, unemployment, loss of tax base, population decline, as well as some health statistics such as cancer rates, asthma rates, infant mortality, heart disease, things of that nature, and having comparative data such as, to compare your target area against county, state, or national rates, can help you build a very compelling story. And again, it's critical to establishing community need. Second, it supports the community story, and that story is comprised of three broad elements. First, you're going to outline the problem and the challenges that are faced by the community. Then you're going to outline how you're going to remedy those problems or challenges. And then finally, you're going to outline what the results will be, and those are your outcomes. So, as I stated earlier, you're going to need to quantify and confirm those needs to support your story. And third, it helps identify project goals, and it does so by identifying and supporting community needs and challenges, which should be the things you address in your project outcomes. So where do you get the data to support your story and your application? So there's numerous sources of data. Many of them are considered traditional sources, which I've highlighted in red, but there's others as well, which I've highlighted in blue. And then there's other less common sources or kind of outside of the box thinking as far as obtaining data. Again, I've highlighted those in green, and that source, it may be an option for more rural communities that aren't able to obtain more localized data. So keep in mind that, even though data sources may be readily available, it does take some time to sift through the sources, analyze the data, and decide, how it best supports your application and your overall project goals. And that's why, we strongly recommend that you always begin doing this as soon as possible. So I just wanted to include, an example of, some demographic data that you might want to use to establish your community challenges and needs. You're not required to use a table in the application, but it is strongly recommended, because what it does is it gives the EPA reviewer the ability to quickly get a feel for the challenges that your community faces and the needs that the community has. And I'll let you start reading that a little bit. It's an example of how you should use the data to support your narrative. And I've included a sample section from a past successful grant application. And as you read through the example, every statement made is quantified with data. So you also see that the applicant does a great job of defining its sensitive and vulnerable populations, which were identified by collecting and analyzing the correct data. Okay, so the second element of the MARC grant application that I'm going to cover is prioritizing and selecting sites. So why is prioritizing and selection of your sites important for a competitive application? Well, first off, it shows a comprehensive approach. So basically, you want to show that you've given thought to what the issues are and what you're trying to achieve by identifying and selecting sites that best represent the issues of your target area and have the highest potential to meet the project goals and outcomes via their redevelopment. So identification and selection of sites also gives you an opportunity to highlight what community engagement activities you've conducted that informed their identification and selection. Blaise mentioned earlier a little bit about community engagement. I think he's going to speak a little bit more about it in this last section that he's going to do. And that doesn't mean that you have to, have performed a comprehensive inventory or developed a formal prioritization process, because those are tasks that can be performed under multi-purpose or community-wide or coalition assessment grants. But you should have conducted some activities that show how you chose those sites that you highlight in your application and show that they basically didn't just fall out of the sky. Secondly, it's important because it makes the best case for your application story. You want to select sites to include in your application that are most compelling for your story. And essentially, you're looking to paint your community in the most impoverished light possible. So having the correct site selected to do that is extremely important. And third, it focuses project goals. Which sites have the most potential to meet your project goals and outcomes? So in addressing those three reasons for prioritizing and selecting sites that I've just mentioned, there are some things to consider. The first is existing brownfield inventory. This again applies to assessment and multi-purpose. If you have a complete inventory, that's great. If you've done that formally. If not, a preliminary inventory will serve this purpose as long as you document how they were identified and make sure they were all located within your target area. You want to consider the location within your target area. Your sites meet the EPA definition of a brownfield. You also want to make sure that your sites are eligible for EPA funding. So you want to make sure that as the applicant, you're not the responsible party. You also want to make sure that the properties are not subject to planned or ongoing removal actions under CERCLA. And you want to make sure that the properties don't have facilities subject to corrective actions. You want sites that have you want to select sites that have the potential to meet project goals. You want to have a minimum of 5 sites for coalition assessment grants. That's required. And what I mean here is that if your project goal is to create open space, don't highlight sites that are zoned for housing and less than an acre in size. It's a common mistake that we see with applicants, that their needs don't correspond to their project outcomes. Is the zoning, as previously mentioned, make sure that it's compatible with proposed reuse. You want to make sure what kind of access does a site have, whether it be roadway, rail, river, or does it serve some other type of water body. And again, you want to make sure that it has associated compelling data, environmental data. So that's or health or crime data. And the last element, but not the least under the application game plan, is projected results or outcomes. So having a clear projected project results or outcomes is extremely important for a number of reasons. And I'm going to highlight 3 of them. The first is that it gives continuity to your application. And by that, I mean that it ties together your community needs and the project tasks to the ultimate goals of your project. If affordable housing, again, is the need, that should be your projected result. And the tasks that you include should move your project forward to achieve that goal. It shows a clear understanding of overall project and goals. So a clear understanding of the Brownfields redevelopment process as it pertains to the work your application proposes. And last, it gives the assurance of success beyond the grant. And by this, I mean an understanding of your project beyond your EPA grant. I've included some examples of project outcomes. And again, it's important, that applicants don't confuse project outcomes with project outputs. Outputs are basically the deliverables that you include in your grant application, such as the number of phase 1s and phase 2s that you're going to conduct, the number of community meetings. Are you going to conduct a brownfields inventory? Examples of outcomes include positive impacts to public welfare, health, environment. Is it going to stimulate the economy? What does that result? Is it going to create much needed jobs? Is it going to expand the tax base? Is it going to increase property values? Will it improve neighborhood investment? So it's also important to relate your outcomes to any that you highlight in your planning documents that you reference. So here's an example from a successful application of how to show the projected outcomes of your project. This example discusses the type of anticipated redevelopment, in this case, housing, how that will attract additional neighborhood investment in the downtown. They discuss the tax incentives of that investment. So, although this example doesn't include it, I wanted to add that, if any of these benefits can be quantified, even if they are projections, it really strengthens your application if you can include that kind of information. So again, depending on your project, how many square feet of new office space will it create? What is the number of single family residences or apartments will it create? How many new jobs will it create? Or how many acres of open space or recreational space will your project create? So if you can quantify that, you want to include that in your application. So to wrap up the game plan section, I'm going to quote Paul Bear Bryant, who's arguably one of the best college football coaches in the history of the game. And he said, "It's not the will to win that matters. Everyone has that. It's the will to prepare to win that matters." And if you take anything away from today's webinar, it's that. Prepare, 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 and start developing your application as soon as possible. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Terry.
What a great pass, Sean. Thank you. So any of you who watched March Madness, you know that you were sitting on the edge of your seat waiting for that last 3 seconds of the Zags games when Suggs threw the buzz beater. And wow, how did that happen? I mean, how do you make that shot from midcourt? Well, according to Mark Few and Suggs, that's part of the game plan. They had worked it, they had trained, and they knew what they needed to do against the clock, and it worked. So make certain, as Sean says, get your game plan in order, know what your next steps are going to be. One of our most recent projects that we just recently closed out with EPA just 2 weeks ago is a massive cleanup during over 100 acres. We had 4 different locations that we worked on in that 100 acres to revitalize our 1974 World's Fair Park, Riverfront Park. This is the last little section in this picture that we just got done cleaning up. We didn't plan for this project to be a brownfields cleanup. This project was cleaned up back in 1974 before the World's Fair. Well, that was before we had regulations that we needed to follow for cleanup. And that was before the EPA and ecology were out there telling us how to do it. When we had the voters pass a $64 million rebuild of Riverfront Park, brownfields really wasn't on our radar for what we might encounter. But lo and behold, the first project that started under construction, which was our ice ribbon, the very first shovel they turned up dirty dirt. And so then Parks Department reached out to me and they said, what the heck are we going to do? If we turned it up here, it's likely to be turned up elsewhere throughout the reconstruction. And we've got 4 years of construction and $64 million from the voters. But the voters' bond was for the redevelopment, not for the cleanup. I quickly called upon our tab providers. And at the time, CDFA was one of those tab providers, and they were offering what was called the marketplace. And what you did is you brought forward a project that had you stymied. And you said, okay, this is what we know we're going to be doing with the project. Now what we need to know is how we can clean it up. And so the tab provider at the time brought in experts to help you understand what your next steps would be for the project. So we were able to quickly pivot, and we actually implemented all 3 steps that the tab provider's experts said we should do. And we ended up scoring on 3 cleanup grants from EPA to help us get the implementation done. Like I said, this was the last of the cleanup projects to wrap up. And in this picture, I don't know if you can see it, but just towards the top of the picture are 4 basketball courts. And that is because Spokane, not only are we the home of the Zags, but we also hold the largest 3-on-3 basketball competition in the world once a year. And then this doesn't look like much right now in the center of the picture, but this is an Ice Age floods themed park for children. And then right up here in the left-hand corner is the City of Spokane and the Public Facilities District's new sports complex that is under construction. So we had a great team with the Parks Department being the quarterback on the project. We had the Parks Board, who became our cheerleading squad, and helped the community understand what they feared. The community feared that here they had been playing and working in this park for generations and that it was dirty when we turned up the dirty dirt. Luckily, they were able to help us calm everybody down, get everybody comfortable with the fact that no, the contamination wasn't on the surface, it is underground, and we were taking care of it as we were cleaning up and reconstructing. It took a game plan. It took also finding the expertise to help us pivot when we needed to so that we could still move forward with the construction project. And it has come about to be a wonderful project. Now I'm going to be passing it off to Blaze now.
I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of those things and kind of the big picture in general, the series of actions, the playbook, the many things you bring to a game to try to get everything to happen. So again, kind of in context of the 3 steps of kind of brownfields redevelopment. So that's the planning step, addressing environmental issues step, and then the redevelopment step. So under the step 1, planning, to repurpose those brownfields, Sean gave a great kind of some good information about going about doing that. Just want to emphasize that the whole idea is to figure out how brownfield sites in your inventory can meet your revitalization goals if you address the environmental issues, and also how important it is to integrate those efforts on those sites with your goals for your city and regional plans. A webinar you might want to check out. Speaking of plans, there's all kinds of community plans. So there really was a good webinar we did recently at the link on the slide there that you might check out just to kind of get smart on all the different kinds of plans. It's the wide world of planning, and it's very good. Just an example of what a community that we worked with did in selecting sites, Las Cruces, New Mexico. They did a lot of great planning work, and also had a GIS department that could look at properties throughout the city to identify those sites that might be eligible for brownfields resources and meet revitalization goals by just looking simply at vacant parcels and older parcels that would be likely to have issues like asbestos and lead-based paint, let's say, and look at that in relationship to a metropolitan redevelopment area. And zoning in on the downtown area, there's also a downtown master plan that was part of a bunch of other plans that are listed. There's a link you could even go to there to look at them all. But basically, they figured out, okay, there's a bunch of city-owned parking lots. In fact, there's too many of them in this area that they want to increase density and mixed uses in the downtown area. So they had too many parking lots. They had too many municipal buildings. And they decided they could consolidate their municipal efforts and use some of the unused space and buildings for catalyst sites to kick off kind of the mixed use approach they want to do. So great strategy because they had control of all of those sites and could therefore more easily get the environmental work done and you know, start the ball rolling on a bigger revitalization effort, and it's worked very well. You don't have to have a fancy GIS department if you're a small town or city. There's the Brownfields inventory tool you can use, the tool we've created. It's been around a long time. A lot of people use it. You can go to the URLs at the top of the slide to learn more about it. You can upload photos. You can generate maps with it. You can even you can do custom searches for sites that fit your prioritization criteria. If you get an EPA grant, you can also report progress on assessments and cleanups to the EPA Acres database, which is a grantee requirement. So again, you know, you don't have to use this, but you could use it and say you're using it in your proposal, you know, to demonstrate you're going about inventorying and prioritizing sites. And that, you know, that could reflect positively on your application, just like a GIS approach would. So community involvement, of course, in setting reuse plans for a site is critical, super critical with EPA or any federally funded project for that matter. It includes informing, soliciting input, maybe doing that in real time and participatory planning meetings. The image on the right is a public day fair where community members are voting on different types of park amenities for a linear park in Springfield, Missouri, that's become a centerpiece for all kinds of development around it. It's been wildly successful. As just one example, I'll mention too on that previous slide, there's a couple of links to some very good recent community involvement and engagement webinars. Actually, one's coming up soon. One was in the past, so please check that out to get a better sense for what that's about. But in taking community input for brownfields work, we're basically informing residents of opportunities and taking their input on, you know, how those sites could be used in context of what's already in a community, what could be improved on, what's missing, that kind of thing. I will make a note that for cleanup applications, there is a specific requirement to make public notice and have a public meeting and to have a public comment period on draft cleanup alternatives for a site, or the kind of the technical, hey, here's how we're going to clean this site up. What do you guys think? You know, taking input on that. So that's actually a specific special requirement too that involves taking community input. It's really important to think methodically through how to identify and attract and involve stakeholders and partners in your project. A bunch of examples of stakeholders and partners are listed on a slide, and on the right side is kind of a graphic of an analysis you can do. It's simple to do to see kind of who you've got involved or who you plan to get involved, to ask to participate if they're not just showing up already, to kind of make sure you've got a good mix of the community at large, nonprofits, government, business, private owners, and the functions they could play in the project. So it's good to think through it carefully. All of this usually results in setting viable redevelopment goals that meet economic, community, and environmental needs that will really ultimately drive the success of a redevelopment project. I'd like to emphasize that it's not a requirement to have renderings and all kinds of things like that done before you apply. But to have an idea of conceptual reuse ideas that the community supports that seem viable, that is important. And just an example of one thing TAB helped with in Zanesville, Ohio, there are a couple of sites. The one on the upper left is the mosaic tile manufacturing plant that had been closed for years, huge site. TAB worked with the city to convene a visioning session for that site and the other site too, that's, as it turns out, and through small group exercises, developed and brainstormed and had votes on kind of the most popular ideas for reuse. And so you can kind of see in the small print there what were more popular ideas that the community thought were needs for that part of the city. And from that, a rendering could be developed through a landscape architect that the city hired. TAB can do those as well. But the point is, though, that you don't need to have the renderings necessarily. The more you can do and say you've done, the better, because it's probably a more solid plan. But even just a rank order list of what you're planning, what you think you'll probably do with that property or that group of properties is what you need. I'll also mention super quick that these proposals or these applications to the EPA, they don't want photos, they don't want diagrams. About the only kinds of formatting you can do are tables and kind of selective formatting of text. You might get away with a bar chart, but so again, it's not important you have renderings. You're not going to be able to show them in your application or anything, but it is important to do as much upfront work as you can. Okay, so the next big step, and it's the one that most of the money for these grants get spent on, is addressing the environmental issues. So just a few quick words about it. That's performing phase 1s and 2s, following EPA's all appropriate inquiry rule, and that has to happen before a new purchaser buys it and revitalizes or redevelops it, so that there are liability protections for that new owner, and so that that site and that project is still eligible for other types of federal funding. It's performed by a qualified environmental professional, usually a part of an environmental contracting firm, to specific standards. If cleanup's required, of course, that environmental contractor, or maybe a different one, depending on which grant you have, right, does that, and there's lots of steps that have to be considered and done, but certainly one of them is it's, a site's being cleaned up for a particular use, so that's why that reuse plan is very important. That helps also determine what type of cleanup might happen on the site. And so obviously you're going to need partners on your team that know something about all of that, right? So environmental consultants, your state and regional EPA Brownfields programs, and particularly your state Brownfields program, because they are the ones that have processes in most states that issue letters and documentation of liability protections for that new owner that kind of specify that, hey, the risk of this site has been addressed, or maybe there's still more that needs to be addressed, but it's okay to use it for this reuse. They're very important. And again, the consultants are the ones that really have the expertise to actually take care of the assessments or the cleanups. The state brownfields programs or TAB can help, if you don't have connections with environmental consultants, can help connect you with a list of them at least. And TAB can also help you vet and eventually hire consultants to do the work if you get the grant. One really important point to know is that the consultants you end up using need to be hired in a fair and open competition using federal procurement rules. So there's some things to know about that as far as working with them beforehand and things like that need to be considered. And again, TAB and others can advise you on that if you don't already know about that. Okay, so last step, the redevelopment, actually implementing redevelopment. It's kind of an extension of your planning step. You're just implementing your plan. Hopefully you've been continuing to solicit public input, because of course it can take years to get from step 1 to step 3. Sometimes it's very fast, but sometimes it's years. And the whole idea is to meet those projected economic and community benefits in the revitalization effort. Many times that involves identifying extra funds. EPA funding is hardly ever enough to take care of sometimes even the environmental issues. So you need to look around, have a funding stack that will support the project. And again, TAB and other technical assistance providers can help you identify those. And you might check out the link just to get a sense for some of the projects we've done and what that kind of looks like. Okay, and again, just about partners. The more partners who have some experience or have a way of doing business, if you don't already have one, the better. For example, Main Streets USA, they've got a revitalization process, right, that downtown development organizations and other organizations follow, that's credible, that works. That's just one example. You don't have to find somebody like that. You may already have a way it works in your community and it's perfect. But again, just it's good to show in your proposal, you list community level partners and state and federal level partners. And it's good to do more than just list them. It's good to show you've got a relationship with them, you've worked with them, et cetera, and you have a good plan. Some additional financial partners, again, back to the state and EPA Brownfields programs, they can actually do individual phase 1 and 2 assessments for you. You can get experience, through having a relationship with them. You can request some work be done anytime. If you have a site and there's a reuse for it, potentially, or if it meets the eligibility criteria, you can get started doing this a little bit, 1 or 2 sites at a time before you apply for money that will allow you to do 20 or 30 sites, for example. So establish those relationships. Also know that there are other federal agencies that flow money to states and regional development organizations that you can apply for, that you can also use for cleanup and redevelopment. So I've listed them on the slide. I'll show you a bigger list in a minute. Oh, I'm sorry. The last point on the previous slide is important, again, just to emphasize that the federal EPA, your regional brownfields programs are a great resource. They're great for brainstorming. They're great for, is my project eligible? Is my idea a good one? before the competition. They're very creative folks. So are the state Brownfields program people. So do reach out, establish a relationship with them as well. This is just probably a somewhat dated list of all the different kinds of federal funding that's out there that, again, flow down through states and regional organizations. And just a reminder, as Ignacio mentioned, there's a great webinar CCLR is putting on, a couple of examples of funding roadmaps that one of our partners can do for your community to kind of target specific types of funding for the type of redevelopment effort you're trying to do, phased over time, helps get you organized. Other upfront work you can do in kind of a random order here. There's applications for MARC grants get submitted through grants.gov, and you have to be set up on DUNS and SAMs to make those submittals. And that, if you're doing it for the first time, it can take several weeks for you to get that set up. Once you've got it set up, you have to maintain kind of the correct point of contact and credentials. And it's good just to make sure now that if you think you're going to submit a proposal, that's all set up and you know who the point of contact is and they're all good to go. It's also a good idea to review past successful proposals to see, what those look like. How did people pitch their project? We have a bunch of them on our website. It shows you how to get to it there. Already talked about your regional EPA Brownfields coordinator, check in with them early. We have the Tab Easy grant writing tool that Debbie mentioned, a couple of links there for you to learn more about that. You can draft your proposals in that. Also going to show you quickly about something we call the Brownfields Community Capacity Assessment, and also a little bit about thinking about how the best way to tell your story. So a way you can do kind of a self-assessment basically on your community Brownfields capacity is to take this assessment basically. You score yourself on different metrics that are indicators of, of Brownfields proficiency, if you will. It's also useful to see, well, what does make a proficient Brownfields team by going through this exercise. You can do it today, then you can do it a year from now or half a year from now and say, hey, we've improved, or we have a plan to improve. You can even talk about that in your proposal, perhaps. Anything you can do in your proposal that's, that just shows that you're for real, you're really trying to do this well. It can't hurt. As far as telling your story well, Sean, I thought you did a good job of talking about this a little bit, but it is all about that script of identifying, the problems brownfields are posing in your revitalization plans, how you're going to address that and what the outcomes will be, and maintaining that storyline throughout the whole proposal. It's very helpful also to talk about your identity as a community very clearly, and the relationship of where you're located and what the nature of these sites, how your project's going to really benefit the community, and again, how it fits into those bigger plans. There are page limits on these proposals, and so it's very important to be succinct and use choiced, well-placed vocabulary that really drive home the important points. Something interesting our tab did recently as part of the Tribal Tab program is a storytelling webinar. We've done a few of them actually, but you could listen to one that happened last October to get a sense for kind of a breaking down a story. Tribal communities, of course, have a close connection with the land and their culture, and it's all integrated very closely. And if you think about it, any community does. So you might look at this, but think carefully about how you articulate relationships with your community members, with community needs, with the land, with the condition of the land, with resolutions of issues. So now Terry's going to really give us some good trick plays in the playbook.
Thanks, Blaze. So now, playbook and trick plays. Blaze talked very well about how important it is to have a playbook and everybody understands your playbook. We recently had applied for a coalition grant. I didn't think we were ready for that. I didn't think that we had a good project for that. At least I didn't in our city's long list of priority projects. I didn't have a project that was ready to go. But one of our partners did. And because they knew of the work that we had been doing, the university district approached us and said, hey, we think that we could help you implement a grant for brownfield redevelopment in the university district. And the university district is a very large area. It's over 800 acres. At the center of it is what we call the university district, which is 5 urban campuses. Gonzaga University, Whitworth University, WSU, Washington State University, and University of Washington are all located in that urban campus. And they had a multitude of sites. You know, Blaise was talking about those open parking lots that are kind of underutilized. So there's a lot of those in the university district. And there's a lot of older commercial structures that people have wanted to repurpose or to tear down and move forward. And I said, okay, well, if you really think that you have enough property owner buy-in, we could make this work. And so we applied for a community-wide assessment under a coalition. And our partners were Gonzaga University, WSU University, and the University District Public Development Authority, which is an arm of the city. It's a municipal corporation, but it has its own standalone board, and they work on their own projects with a little bit of guidance from the city of Spokane. But it is kind of at arm's length. Now, the university district said, okay, here are our priority sites. We matched those up with what we knew might possibly be contaminated in the area. And then we had the partnership of the university district board and our coalition members to really hit the ground running and drum up excitement for helping us identify phase 1 and phase 2 opportunities. That project, of course, a coalition grant is typically a 3-year implementation. Luckily, with the fact that we had so much excitement about moving forward, we'll wrap that project up in 18 months. And this is where trick plays come in. We had this one site where we had this old building, and we had a new medical facility that was in the pipeline, the playbook, the game plan for building in the near future. Well, this site was not only went through a phase 1, a phase 2, an ABCA, which is an alternative brownfields cleanup alternatives. I'm not good with acronyms, sorry about that. And we have done all of that during 2020 under COVID. And it is now broken ground, and we will be realizing that project. There's a couple other projects in the university district that have also gone all the way through completion to groundbreaking. But it's important, it is so important to know what it is you're going to do before you apply. Blaise also mentioned utilizing your regional office for assistance for those one-off type projects, that targeted brownfields assistance to come in and do a phase 1 and a phase 2. It helps you build a relationship with those referees, your regulators at EPA, and they will, they manage the contract. They will get the work done. They will produce the product, but you are the boots on the ground local person that is working with them, and it helps you build a relationship with them. And it also shows that how you are responsive as an applicant, because there is some work you need to do. You just don't need to manage the funding or the contract, but you need to take care of some local logistics as you move forward on those projects. So definitely seek those out. There's no cost to you, and it can actually help answer a lot of questions about your site. Now, I think at this time, I'm passing it back to Debbie for a recap of everything that we've done.
Yeah, thank you, Ignacio, Blaise, Sean, and Terry. Great. So in summary, you need to take the time now, familiarize yourself with the programmatic requirements of each grant that you are thinking about applying for. A good idea is to look at last year's grant guidelines, because often the guidelines don't change that much. So you can kind of see what are the questions EPA is asking. Know and reach out to your state, federal, and local partners, including your TAB. Like Terry just said, you want to build those relationships. Start thinking about your brownfield program in areas where there are gaps or areas which need to be strengthened. One way you can do that is by using that capacity assessment tool that Blaise was talking about. That's available to every community. It's free of charge. You can start honing in and thinking about potential target areas and make sure you have all the pieces in place. If you don't, you need to start gathering that data or information and or strengthening your program now. You have several months before the guidelines are out. So now's the time to do whatever background work that you need to do. Also, you want to make sure you're involving your community and key stakeholders along the way. Blaise mentioned there are several webinars out there. I know K-State has done several. There's, several out there from each TAB providers. So if you're not sure how to do that, you might want to view one of those webinars. And finally, make sure you understand the assessment and cleanup process and the key steps you'll need to undertake. Think through how that will work in your organization and community and who will do what. This way, you have time to make sure those involved understand their roles. If they don't know how to do something or need more experience, they have time to get that experience. Those things will enable you to tell your compelling story, including who, what, where, and why. That is so important in developing a winning grant application. Here is the contact information for today's speakers. This slide includes some additional useful links, whether it be grants.gov, I think that was already an earlier slide, the Brownfield Inventory Tool, Tab EC, which is a tool to help you prepare and write your grant application. It includes tips. It goes, right now it's set for last year's guidelines, but as soon as this year's guidelines are issued, within like a week, Tab has to update it. Also, you might want to look at last year's guidelines because, like I said, things don't change that much. If you need Tab technical assistance, please feel free to reach out to the Tab representative. Another great place to get Brownfield information and help is at the EPA Brownfield Conference. And thank you so much for joining today's webinar.
One second. There you go. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much. I know that was a really great video with a lot of detail and a lot of information, but our job is to make sure that you're comfortable with understanding how to apply for our EPA Brownfields funding and the process. So we're going to take questions at this time. So please feel free to start putting your questions in the chat and we'll be able to address those questions. But in the interim, thank you so much for filling out our poll. So our poll questions, we have at least 50% of the audience is new and would not have applied for a grant. We also have at least 25% that would like additional one-on-one training to get started. And then we have about 50% of the audience that has applied for a grant but were not awarded one. We have 50% of the audience that are grantees and would like additional grants. And then as far as being ready to apply for an EPA Brownfields grant, we said we have folks that said 29% said, yes, I am ready to apply. And then we have 43% that said, I'm not sure and would like additional assistance. And then 29% said, no, not at this time. So really nice mix of different types of knowledge sets in the audience. So please, we want you to be comfortable. We want you to ask questions. So please feel free to use the chat. In the interim, I will start to ask our panelists some questions so we can get started. So how about we start with Allison? Allison?
Yes.
What should anyone who's interested in applying, what should they start to do first?
Well, I think that video, was outstanding and accurate. Like, know your project and start involving your community. Learn about the grant process, what's involved with assessments and cleanups, and take a look at last year's guidelines to get a sense of the information that you should have before you start to write a grant application. And Jean can probably add to that also, as she works with lots of applicants as well.
One of the things we do suggest is you actually read a grant. There are some public grants that you can access. What we find in terms of deficiencies, and obviously Shanine and Allison can speak to this more specifically, a lot of the deficiencies are that you're not specific enough and you're not answering the question that's being asked in the section it's being asked. A lot of it is just an editing issue. And if we could really focus in on what do you need to know, what are they asking for in that section, and to get you to be very responsive to answering that question. You have a lot of people reading a lot of applications and you need to make it easy on them. You need a compelling story and you need it to be well written, and you need what they expect to see in a particular section in that section. But it might be also helpful, Allison, if you could talk about the relationship between the targeted brownfield assessments. I know they touched a little bit on the video, but how does that interplay with the Brownfields grant? Can you apply for both? Should you do, how does the relationship of those products work?
Okay. Yes, you can apply for both at the same time. The Targeted Brownfield Assessment program is technical assistance, so it's not a competitive grant process. If you have a project that needs a phase 1 or phase 2 site assessment, EPA can perform those assessments for you at no cost to you. We use our own contractor, we use our own funding. We like to target projects that have like substantial redevelopment potential so that we can see some success stories. The process is really easy. We have a form to be filled out to determine if the site is eligible. If it is eligible, we keep, a queue of all of the projects that are eligible. And as funding becomes available, we perform the assessments for you. At this point, we do have funding available for phase 1 work in Puerto Rico. I also want to mention that CClear has helped dozens of applicants prepare the forms. They're very simple. It's basic site information. We just want to determine that basically you're not liable for the contamination at the site. And, then we move through the process. I don't know if anyone has any specific questions on it. I have the forms. We can get you my contact information. Jean has the forms also.
I think just to explain in case it wasn't clear, the big difference is that you contract with an approved contractor who will come in and do the phase 1 work. So the grant is actually not being managed by the municipality or applicant. So that could save people time and money. And just the application itself is much easier to complete and is not on a cycle, as you said. So right now, the EPA grant cycle just ended, and just last week, EPA announced the awardees for fiscal 2021. So now we're in a period and that there's no open solicitation currently, and we'd be looking for a September date, maybe Shanine or Allison know more, when they would release the next round, and that would include, again, assessment, cleanup, and revolving loan fund options at that time.
That is correct. If you haven't received any notification about not being successful, it should be coming your way pretty soon. And then as project officers, we'll be conducting the debriefing with you as per your request. So you'll get comments and feedback on your current application. But in addition to that, we like to offer tips throughout the entire duration of the grant cycle. Tips include just making sure that you understand the structure and what's required of you in the guidelines. Just make sure that you understand there is a threshold section, and that is our pass or fail section, and you have to include it with your narrative. Basically, those are the questions that we ask in the guidelines for which you get awarded points for, but please make sure that you have your threshold section included as well, because if you don't include the threshold section, we can't move you forward to the national competition. And does anybody else have any other tips that like to provide?
I'll add one thing we see is a question might have 2 parts to it. And a lot of times the applicant will do a fantastic job answering the first part and kind of forget to answer the second part. So, we're forced to not give full points in that case. So I think just having a real clear idea of what the guidelines are asking and, providing a complete response.
I agree, Allison. Also having a really good vision for that site and making sure that you incorporate that into your application and have it clear. The vision from the beginning of your narrative to the end is very helpful. Even your outputs and outcomes, as mentioned in the presentation, that should also include the vision as well. Just making sure on the financial side and providing us with a budget and a narrative, that your narrative or your description or your justification for the budget is concise, it's clear, it includes units, items, that the numbers add up, and this makes sense to the reviewer, because you not only are writing for us in the region, you're writing for other regions as well, for them to understand your project. So you have to make it as clear and concise as possible.
Though there are many communities that choose to write them themselves with a grant writer, you can also consider a consultant, and that is something we could discuss with you. So CClear with David Southgate and our other consultants, Sonia Cosmos, can support a one-on-one conversation with you just to evaluate where you are you ready, which properties would you apply for. There are a number of different kinds of assessment grants, whether they be site specific or they be more of a area wide. So best to have a conversation, look at some of the options, understand what's required, and then make some decisions about moving forward. The video you just saw was recorded just 2 weeks ago, because it's never too early to start. Sometimes the upfront work and the community engagement and building the partnerships, can take several months. So that's why this conversation is perfectly timed for the next round. So we do suggest that if you are interested and to get more information, CClear can help you. We can bring in EPA to speak to you as well during this period now. And that is also, a very successful collaboration to help you really assess where you're at and to put in place the steps you might need for this year or next year, but to be moving towards, really looking at those properties that are ready for second acts in your community, where you've identified them as either catalytic or prioritized projects because of health and safety, because they could stimulate economic development, because they're eyesores. Those are all reasons to really think about which properties you want to prioritize and to move on.
I agree with you 100%, Jean. It takes time, as they mentioned. Planning is really, really critical, especially as far as planning with your partners. You definitely want to include your community partners, have them available up front, have them part of the process of developing the application, because we want to know whether or not your project has been presented to the community, but we also want to know if the community has any type of feedback, any type of information or advice they want to bring to the project as well. And that should also come out in your application. So make sure that you start to get those partners up front, get them a clear understanding of what your goal is or motive for this grant, and just have them as part of the advisory board throughout the entire duration of the project. And all of that takes a lot of time. So you want to make sure that you are reaching out to all the different elements of your community. You may want to get your planning people involved. You might have a local historian. You have all of those community members who will be impacted by that brownfields. They should all be a part of the process. So that's very helpful.
So the other thing to do is to go to the exhibitor booths. EPA has an exhibitor booth, CClear has an exhibitor booth, other agencies and resources. So we suggest, if you don't have questions now, but if things come up or you go back and you speak to a couple people in your community during the week and you want to come into our exhibitor booths later in the week or contact us after the conference, please be in touch with us. We're here to support you.
Yes, Jean, thank you so much for that. We have some really great fact sheets. If you are interested in learning more about what a brownfield is, we definitely have the definition of a brownfield. We also have fact sheets on the type of contaminants you could expect in your neighborhood. We also have fact sheets on some of the redevelopment plans, designs that have been taking place not only in our region, but throughout the country. So please reach out to us if you have any questions or concerns. You can reach out to EPA, you can reach out to CClear. There are technical assistance provided for brownfields, and they've been doing a great job. As they mentioned, they can review applications. They can also assist with a lot of technical needs that we may not be able to assist with right away. So it's just a really great partnership. And like I said, please, we want to make sure that you really understand what our program is all about. We want you to be successful when you submit applications. So please don't be shy in coming to us for questions or concerns.